Okay. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today at rhepodcast. This is Isaiah Diesel, joined with my partner in crime, Sid. Sid Vicious, how you doing, man?
Good.
Good. Good to see you
Good, good.
live, man. I understand you just got back from Mexico.
Yeah, yeah. No, I had a little first trip I've had out of country for 5, 6 years now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because
Eh,
I was sick and couldn't go, and then COVID came, and then I couldn't go.
right.
So yeah, no, it was nice to get away. Finally, someplace that was warm and sunny. It's been a long winter up here, so
Did you have any kind of fear and anxiety about what was going on because of what happened recently happened in Mexico?
no, I booked a trip in the later in the fall, almost around somewhere in December, and at that time they were starting to have problems with the cartel business
Mm-hmm.
down there. So I mean, the way I and the person I went with, we kind of chatted about it, but it was like, well, we're going to an all inclusive. If
Oh,
I
right.
kind of assume, and plus we were in a lot of that stuff was further north. We were down in Puerto Vallarta, which is
Mm,
mid country, and we just figured, well, we'll get we'll get to the airport, we'll get to the hotel, then we can kind of
yeah,
gauge how things are going, right? So, but
yeah.
no, where we were, Puerto Vallarta, was the only places where you saw a military presence was the airport and
Mm,
the port there for like the cruise ships in the marina, and
mm-hmm.
people go like we went on a snorkeling tour. You have to pass through security. There's bomb
Wow,
sniffing dogs, drug sniffing dogs, guys walk around with machine
wow.
guns. But everywhere else around town, you saw the odd police car, but locals weren't. Even at night, you went outside of the resort, and the locals were fine. They were all walking around.
Mm,
Nobody seemed concerned. So
yeah.
no, it was uneventful there. But then while I was down there is when those four Americans got kidnapped.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Uh, Maggie, Maggie, is it Maggie or Mage?
Mage.
Mage, okay. Now that you call it Maggie, I'm starting to see it now. I always saw Mage, but so Mage, have you ever been to Mexico?
No, I've never been to Mexico, but I was born pretty close to the border.
You ever been to Canada? The Sid's from Canada.
I came pretty close to that border too.
there you go.
Okay. Actually, I'll tell you a real quick story before we get into the talk. But I was visiting my girlfriend in Mexico, and not Mexico. She lives in Texas, but it's like on the border of Mexico. So I took a train there, and in El Paso, you could see like right over into the border. Okay, so as I'm on the train, these like really thuggish guys get on the train, and they're like walking around and they're looking for somebody. And I look down at their hip, and they're all packing heat, right? They all got guns, and I'm like, oh my god, so I'm about to die right now. But then they get on with the dog, and it turns out these guys are like federal agents, and they caught this black couple, and they had them outside, and they had two duffel bags just stuffed with bricks of weed, man. I got a picture of it. It was a crazy, crazy, crazy story. But Sid, so so I know you heard about the Americans
Yeah.
that died down there, and did you have you seen anything about what's going on in El Salvador with the how do you call it, the crackdowns that they've been doing against the gangs?
Not as closely as I would have liked to have paid attention to it. I know a little bit about El
Oh, because you
Salvador.
just
Well, not from being down there, just from general knowledge. There's a couple different problems in El Salvador. One, they've got I think it's the ex Sandinista Daniel Ortega is the president there,
Mhm.
and he got elected democratically, but he sure turned into a bit of a strongman or an autocrat. So they've got issues in that country with the government doing stuff to the people. Then they've got issues with criminal cartels and gangs, like you say.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, well, different topic, but I mean, I think a lot of what's happened in Central America is what's driving refugees north, both to
Mhm.
Canada and the U.S. Obviously.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, this is so crazy. I can't even believe this, but I just saw it was like Dateline or whatever, but it was saying a lot of these guys, they're flying into Canada and trying to cross the border into America, coming south, man. I never thought I would see the day something like that would happen, but
it's cheaper and in some ways it's easier. They're still using when they do that, they're still the people that are doing it are still using human traffickers to get
coyotes.
Yeah,
they call them coyotes.
If they fly to an airport in Canada, they still got to use somebody to get them to the border. And then we've had some problems there because in the wintertime they're dropping families off when it's minus 30. Like one family from India froze to death out in the middle of
God,
because it's not a patrolled border, but nature patrols it. Like you can't drop people off and have them hiking at 30 below through miles of farmland trying to find a place, right? So it's not good. It's not good.
And mate, do you have any thoughts on that about how I'm not sure if you saw it, but they arrested something like 65,000 people over the last year, and they've been cramping them. They're putting them into really cramped jails. So they're lining up like almost naked. They're almost naked because they're down in their boxers, and they're lining them up in like rows and stuff. So it's like, actually, one thing that they did that I got to say I really appreciated was that they forced those inmates to go desecrate like the MS-13 gang graves. So they had them out with like sledgehammers, like literally pounding off the gang symbols and stuff, because it's pretty out of control there. You know, they said that they had like their deadliest day where there was like 65 people who died from violence, I should say, just violence. But then after that, they've had something like 200 days. So the last 6 months where like no one's died from gang violence. So what do you think about those kind of means to an end, Mage?
My thoughts about Mexico is we should probably take a more humanitarian approach with the country. I mean, obviously they have a pretty bad ad there, and we're trying to basically you cut things off, and we have these drugs and all this coming through. We're trying to put more restrictions on it, and I think we're not really addressing the actual problems that are causing this to begin with.
Right. Yeah, I think just more compassion in general is a better way to deal with it.
Yes.
But maybe they're with the gangs, maybe they're going a little bit too overboard. But I think getting those guys off the street just in general probably is a good idea.
Well, if they're of course, if they're being a danger to other people, I mean that needs to be addressed. Obviously, that's not what I'm getting at, though.
Right. I'm saying like I don't mind them putting them in in cells and stuff, but some of the stuff it seemed a little bit dehumanizing, like the way that they had them like naked, pretty much, and like lining them up. Like you could essentially accomplish the same kind of things without going to that level. But I understand.
Dehumanizing a person is just going to make them worse.
Yeah, I can understand in principle why they would want to do that, but I'm sure there's a better way to do it. But anyway, so Sid, so we are going to be discussing evolution today, and I do want to say this. First of all, let me ask you, Sid, do you know? Have you studied a lot about this topic yourself?
I mean, I'm not a biologist by any stretch. I mean, I do work. My field of work involves because part of my job is wastewater treatment. Mm-hmm. I do deal with biology because that's the primary way you treat wastewater is using bacteria.
Really?
Yeah. So when I went to college to study for this field, I mean, we do a lot of biological courses because you're dealing with biology. So I am no raving expert in any way, stretch, or form of the imagination on evolution, other than just as a layman with a little bit of background with my work. So
right,
yeah.
And what about you, Mitch?
Oh, I take it as a hobby. I am not an evolutionary biologist. I'm definitely not on the level of those people like Aaron Ra, Gutsick Gibbon, and Forrest Valkai. I'm not on their level.
Yeah.
I wish I were. Maybe someday.
Yeah, those guys that Valkai, Balkai. There's a little bit of noise going on in someone's. But that guy's that guy definitely knows his stuff. But I will say this: I have learned from doing this podcast that it's best that if I don't engage or try to engage seriously on topics that I'm not well informed enough about. So I wouldn't go and debate this topic, but there are some things that I think I've just experienced from just common sense and traveling and living in different countries that somewhat can contribute to this. But I'm certainly not an expert myself. And so
to give you a little bit more background on me, I actually didn't get any formal training, and I didn't really hear about it in school except for Mendel's Peapod experiments of inherited traits. I actually really only heard about it until I was in my mid-20s, which is where I started getting interested in it. And it was also around the time I starting to get into becoming an atheist, oddly enough.
Well, actually, that I was going to ask you that. Did that contribute to you being an atheist?
No.
Really? Okay. Oh, what about you, Sid? Did that play into influencing you?
No, no. But I think that's something we're going to discuss here about. I think there's a bit of a. We'll get into it, but there's a bit of a false dichotomy here when you say, it's almost like it's set up like if you believe that evolution is real, then you have to not believe in God, or if you believe creationism real, then it means you have to believe in a God. I mean, those aren't a real dichotomy. That's a false dichotomy.
Okay.
We can talk about that. But
yeah.
really, atheism has nothing to do with biology.
Yes, that's true.
I never had a thing where if evolution's true, then there can't be a God.
Oh, and even the title card with the Walk of Man, that's actually an inaccurate depiction of evolution.
I know it's.
I'm sorry.
I just
that.
The Walking Man.
The title, the Walk of Man. As a title card, that's an inaccurate depiction of evolution.
Yeah, but see, what it cuts off though because it was very long. I didn't realize when I downloaded. It's a really long picture. So he's walking over and then he puts on a business suit and then he sits down. Oh, thank you, Mage. But he sits down and then he's at a computer. So he goes from being a monkey to sitting down. Okay, so that's interesting.
Yeah, this is an image from Berkeley, and they're kind of give you a 101 in depiction of evolution.
Okay, I unfortunately can't see the top right because of the logo is there.
Oh, that's
I'll see if
that's a little bird right there, and
okay,
the logo is covering it. So you have birds and alligators, and you have basically the middle part would be their common descent. You can see where some
so
match them and go together.
Then let's just start off then with question number one: is that what convinces you that evolution is true? Start off with Sid.
What convinces me is true is that I've seen fossils. We have a famous museum in Canada, in Alberta, called the Royal Tyrrell Museum of Paleontology. And it's got an awesome website. If you ever get a chance to go see it, I'm sure the States has something similar in Montana, somewhere in their Badlands. I'm sure they've got a similar museum. But and I've actually gone out on digs there. You can, as a tourist, you can go with a paleontology student and actually dig.
Really?
Yeah. So it was funny because just a little side story quickly. A little kid beside me, he was about 10 years old. He found a big carnivore dinosaur tooth. So he's all excited. The paleontologist was talking to him, right? You weren't allowed to keep anything, but the kid was super excited he found this. Right? The students explained to this kid, okay, this was a carnivorous dinosaur. This came from blah, blah, blah. But he was, and then somebody else asked the paleontologist, well, how do you tell what a fossil is compared to like just regular rock? Like, how do you know if you have a chip of bone or like a piece of fossilized bone, like a broken piece, that's not obvious compared to like a piece of rock, how would you tell the difference, right? So the paleontology students explaining, okay, well, fossils will be different colored from the rock they're around. They're usually rounder. They might have a sharp edge where they're broken, but if there's something else intact on the fossil, it'll be smooth. And as he's describing this, I'm looking at this little tiny pebble in my hand, and everything he's saying about what a fossil is, because I just thought it was a little tiny rock, like literally like a small pebble, like almost like the size of a grain of rice. So as he's describing this to these two people, I'm looking up at this thing, man. I go, something like this. I go and I hold it out to him, and he was like, he goes, I've never seen anybody. That was a tooth from a freshwater fish that used to swim in a river where the dinosaurs were. He goes, I've never seen anyone find a freshwater fish tooth. I said the only reason I found it is because you were describing what this stuff looks like as I'm holding it.
Yeah, it can take a trained eye.
Well, yeah, he said that's what he said. He goes, I'm surprised you would even. But well, I just said because you're describing it, I'm looking at it. I'm not. I don't have any special gift about picking rocks out or fossils. But no, I just think if you look through the history of because the funny thing is it wasn't just Charles Darwin that came up with this theory of evolution. There was another guy named Wallace at the same time was kind of pushing this way. But before Darwin, before Darwin, back to the ancient Romans, they had the Chinese people had found fossils, and before they just assumed they were just the bones of mythological creatures. Like the Chinese thought they were dragons. The Romans thought they were whatever their mythological
gods
were. Right, or what? Well, not gods so much, but like say the Minotaur, or the ancient Greeks would think it was a centaur. The Romans would think it was a centaur. The ancient Greeks would think it was a Minotaur. They just put together folklore to explain it. And then the Europeans did the same thing. They used to have they called them speaking stones. It was the megalodon shark tooth. They were all over Europe, and people thought they were the tongues of
giants,
dragons or something, right? So, but then there was guys that started looking at, what are these? And one guy figured out that those speaking stones, he was a Scotsman. This was years before Darwin. He figured out they weren't tongues of lizard or tongues of dragons. He looked at current shark teeth and then compared the megalodon, these speaking stones, and said, well, these must be shark teeth. Because what else would they be? But then he had to figure out, well, why would they be in the middle of a rock, in the middle of the land? And then these guys started figuring out, and these guys were like theologians. There was a Danish a seminarian, a bishop actually named Steno, that figured out how sedimentation worked, and that's how, like, if something was in the ocean, something hard must have floated to the bottom of the ocean, got covered in sediment. And as the sediment covered, the sediment in the bottom would get compressed and turned into sandstone and limestone, which is where he was finding these fossils. So it's not like Darwin just popped out of nowhere with this idea. It was all built on previous guys that were religious believers, like committed. Most of the people in academics before the 1700s were all Christians or Muslims, or they weren't these rabid atheistic thinkers. Well, it was guys that were just looking at the earth, and they figured, well, how would a shark's tooth get into the middle of Europe?
Well, even Darwin himself was
right. So this was all pre-built. So there's tons of evidence that life forms came, lived for a period of time, went extinct. Then other life forms came, lived for a period of time, went extinct. But before Darwin, everybody assumed that God created the life, but he must have had to keep creating it.
Yeah, that was one assumption.
Or that some animals that died in Europe, maybe they still live in the ocean somewhere, or maybe they live in Africa somewhere and they're still alive, but they don't live here anymore. So that was kind of the two, but none of them said, well, there's no God.
All right, and Mage?
Well, a lot of the evidence of getting into the fossil record, if you can line up these fossils in order of what time they died in, and do a comparative anatomy to each one, and we create a phylogeny. That's that basically what you're looking at here in my image. That's a phylogeny.
Right.
But we don't even need the fossil record to do that. We can actually look at our own DNA and see
DNA.
this very thing as well. And several different methods as well of looking at our DNA. And so we can look at, for instance, we can look at endogenous retroviruses. So these are basically the viruses that infected an organism that was able to pass that on into their ancestors. reason we find, I mean, since they randomly appear, that it's really hard right from to appear in the exact same spot, but we're finding these things in the exact same spot, right, in different species. So that would indicate if there's a definite relationship between those species.
So,
And,
oh, sorry.
oh, you want to ask something?
Well, I was going to say, really, for me, so I do believe in evolution, and as you know, I'm a Christian, and I don't think that those, like, some Christians hear that and they think it's really, really sacrilegious or really anti-biblical or illogical or whatever. But I mean, ultimately, I believe that God created everything, and so one of the things He would have created was a mechanism to create diversity among life, and that I don't know. I may have a minority position on this view because
I can see
well,
I can see where people will come up with that, because if you look at a literal translation of the Bible, the Bible's order of things is actually wrong compared to what we can see in science.
well, okay, but I want to explain what the minority position is, because there are other Christians who believe in evolution as well.
Well, you have plenty.
But what I would say, what I think I might have a minority position is that I believe if God created a mechanism that if we were to rewind the clock again, and some of it is just going to come down to chance, like things could have turned out in different ways, like humans could have looked different, or dogs could have looked different, or whatever. I guess they wouldn't really be dogs, but
yes, there is some element of chance in the mechanism, but it's not entirely by chance. For instance, natural selection is not by chance.
Well, hold on. We'll get into that. Let me finish it with where I'm going with this, because I am finishing my third book right now on racism. And one of the things about the racism is getting into how we look so different, Africans from Asians to blacks and whites, Mexicans, Latinos, and getting into seeing how the environment, the weather, the nature, what we're eating, how this can influence the way that we look, or how hairy we are, how light our skin might be, even the bone structure of our face, it's very different among Asians than, Americans. Like, and I have a mixed child, by the way, who's half Korean. So seeing the way that, my wife's facial features are totally different than mine. And I look at that and I say, well, clearly there's environments able to influence things. And then obviously you take a look at like dogs. I mean, there's such a wide variety of dogs, and they must have, and some of that has been bred in deliberately by people. And so some of that is, finding certain traits that you want to promote, and, selective breeding and stuff. So clearly something is playing a role in that. But I do think, well, we can get into this, whether or not there's any chance involved in that marriage, because I would like to talk a little bit more about that. But we'll separate these two questions then. What would convince you that evolution was not true? Sid?
Well, let's say if somebody found a modern mammal fossil, let's say a rabbit or a primate of some type, a modern one, like a chimpanzee primate fossil. If you found that in an original dinosaur bone bed, not because there is a chance where you had dinosaur bones that were fossilized, got washed into a river. They were still this was like maybe 1 million years ago, a riverbank that had fossilized dinosaur bones, and it got eroded. The fossils fell into a river. The chimpanzee fell into the river, drowned. They got buried together. The chimpanzee bones then got fossilized, right? So you could find, and I haven't looked into it, but I'm sure it's been found before, where you had modern mammals that were found in dinosaur bone bed that way. That's not an original dinosaur bone bed. Those fossils have moved, right? Okay, so I'm putting that exemption out there. But let's say it was an original dinosaur, like in the Badlands of Alberta, original dinosaur bone bed, if you found a chimpanzee fossil there, that's going to take some explaining. And then conversely, if you found a dinosaur fossil in a Precambrian fossil bed, that would have to take some explaining for the same reason, because those animals, they didn't live together at the same time.
Mhm.
So, but the theory that would have to replace evolution then would still have to explain everything that evolution explains, plus something would have to be added to it to explain why we're seeing modern chimpanzee fossils in original dinosaur bone beds, and why we're seeing dinosaurs in Precambrian bone beds. You know what I mean?
Right.
It can't just be, well, evolution is wrong, therefore
Right.
X is right. It's no, X
Right,
has
right.
to do all the explaining that evolution does, and then add a little bit to explain that.
Right. So it wouldn't necessarily disprove it, but it would put a really big
a big hole in it.
Right.
Yeah. And a lot of
Right.
the things I find with people discussing this, and I find this when I discuss it on Facebook and stuff, is that people will say, "Oh, well, you look at the complexity of an eye, and
Mhm.
the chances of all those parts being put together. The mathematics is astronomically difficult to comprehend how that could happen."
Mhm.
Oh, and so then they go around and say, "Well, then evolution can't be true." Well, okay, then you explain.
Right.
You
Right.
explain how that, and you can't just say, if you just say, "Well, God created the eye." Okay, well then you're saying, and then, because this is, and I wanted to just, when you guys were talking before, I wanted to touch on this. I think there's a difference between intelligent design and unintelligent design. And I think you can see something that's unintelligently designed fairly quickly. Like, for instance, manatees have fingernails. Now, if you were an intelligent designer and you designed that animal, why on earth would you give it fingernails? Why would you give whales hip bones? Why would you give Why would you give an ostrich wings?
Why have a nerve?
Hold on. No,
Hold up.
no.
Let me add.
Okay, but that would.
Yeah,
be
let me add one. Yeah. So I think saying intelligent design isn't intelligible for Christians should say. What we should be saying is intentional design, because you could say, like, a lot of people will point to like the human art and saying, "Oh, it's not well designed, and it could be designed in a way that could lift more." And they'll go through and they'll try to pick apart everything about the human body that, as you would say, like, not intelligently designed, like unintelligently designed. And so that, as a Christian, if you say intelligently designed, I don't know, it gets in someone's mind that it has to be like absolutely perfect. And I think the more intelligent thing to say would be just intentionally designed. Like, it had to have been created for. I'll get into that in a minute, but I'll give it over to Mage. What do you think about that?
You have to restate your question.
Well, no, I'm sorry. He'd wanted to get in before that. I didn't have a question.
Oh,
all I was saying was that I don't think it's a good thing for Christians to say intelligent design, because then it opens it up to people saying, "Well, this isn't intelligently designed." Well, I would just say it's intentionally designed. But go ahead.
I think there are obvious points that we can even argue. Doesn't even look like it was intentionally done.
Okay.
Take the pharyngeal nerve, for instance, how it loops around and the aorta nerve, if do go right back up the neck. I mean, this worked fine, and we didn't have necks, but take a look at what we got going with the giraffe. Or another example I heard recently was with our own testicles being on the outside. If we wanted to design that we could have just made the sperm more hardy to heat instead of having to cool our system, and by having these very sensitive part on the outside.
Oh, okay. They're on the out. Okay. I didn't catch it. I have never heard that before. By the way, I've never heard that.
And to answer the question of what would
that is interesting. That is interesting.
and to answer the question of what would convince me it's not true,
Mhm.
features is jumping in branches. So, for instance, taking my little diagram here, let's say we
Mhm.
found hair on the amphibian. That would disprove evolution. So
Okay,
basically,
so going back,
that's the trait that defines this mammal area here. But we found it on, say, the bird, or the amphibian here. That would disprove evolution there.
well,
If you
it's
found,
interesting.
yeah. Sorry, go
Oh,
ahead.
Sid, yeah, no, Sid, you had mentioned. I think you mentioned. So you mentioned whales. Either you mentioned whales or dolphins, but I think
Whales,
that's
yeah.
really, yeah, whales, because that, to me, that is one of the most solid. The whale is one of the most solid forms of evidence I think I have to believing in evolution, because the whale's ancestor is more closely, uh, it's more closer to a dog than an
It's
actual fish.
Yeah, it was
they're
a
they're
land. It
So
was a land animal, and
they're,
if you
they're
have a
close.
land animal, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Their closest relative is actually the hippo. Current
the
their
hippo.
current living relative.
Well, the point is, though, if you look at their fins, you can actually see, like, the vestigial bones, and
Yeah, and
so to me, it's clear that animals have gone in and out, of the ocean, and uh, it seems like, you adapt, as it is, you adapt. And I know this is completely, this is fiction. So, um, but mentioning Avatar 2, The Way of Water, recently came out, and the the avatars who were living in the water, they were starting to develop like thicker arms where they could swim easier. And so when the land avatars go and they try to get into the water, uh, they have a really hard time to swim very, and go into to deeper levels. And but I think if humans were evolving to eventually go back into the water, you would see something like that at a very, very, very slow pace.
Something
So to
something
me,
like
it
that.
seems logical. It seems logical. Go ahead.
Something like that could happen, and if the two groups were separated, where they're
Hmm.
not interbreeding.
Right.
And we actually do see these sort of things like that happening in humans. Like you have greater lung capacity with people who have been
Right.
somewhat separated, living up in mountain areas. And there's
Like in the Andes.
there's actually another, since we're talking about people swimming, and they're actually the isolated group of people who actually develop a greater lung capacity and be able to dive for longer periods of time.
Yeah, I saw one where this guy. If you wouldn't have seen this, if I didn't have seen this with my own eyes, I simply wouldn't have believed it. But this guy dove down, and he was down there for like 10 minutes, but he
Yeah.
actually dove down and he went to the bottom of the ocean and was walking around on the bottom of the ocean and had a spear and was killing stuff, man.
Mhm.
I mean, that was. Have you ever seen that video, Sid?
I haven't seen the video myself, but
no, neither have I. But I know there's people that can deep dive.
Yeah.
But just to go back a second though, like so.
Yeah. Good.
So I think one of the problems that happens is that if people say, I think of God, like if let's say like you, Isaiah, you say, okay, God created, God was the creator and created life. That should be a period. It shouldn't be how God did it. It should just be that God did it. Like a God did it. Now the way and the analogy I use for this is if you say to a Christian that says if I in the debate with a Christian and they say, oh well, oh yes, no God, let's use the whale example. I'll pull up the whale example of the hips. They say, well, there must be a purpose for the whales to have the hips because an intelligent designer must have gave the whale hips for a reason. There must have been an intelligence there must have been a purpose for the design. But my thing would be go back. What I would say to them is that, okay, well, if that was designed, if somebody looked at a whale, because you can look at fish, like you were saying, you look at fish don't have hips because they evolved in the water. So the whale, like you rightly pointed out, it didn't evolve in the water. It was a land animal that transferred into the water. Well, of course it's going to have hips because at one point its ancestors walked on land. They needed hips. So my point to that back is to say we're kind of people I don't know why they do this, but if you want to say there's a creator, fine. The creator set up. The creator doesn't have to. And the analogy I use to talk to people about this is that, well, do you think God goes into the womb and just starts putting arms and legs on a fetus? Like if we know, even people that believe God created everything, those people don't think that God goes into everybody's womb when they're having a child and builds the child, right? The embryo goes through a transitional period, a process in the womb of development, which is which is quote unquote natural. And we can see this. Human embryos will grow fur at one point, lose it. They'll have a tail at one point, lose it.
Yeah, embryology actually is another point of evidence for evolution.
But my point is that people that believe that God created everything, they don't think God goes into the womb and builds each individual child. So I always step that analogy back and say that's fine, and I agree. But if you step the analogy backwards and say, well, why would you think then God would intervene all the time, making new animals and adjusting animals and intelligently guiding this process? Well, you wouldn't think that. What you would think is you'd say, okay, God created the conditions for evolution to happen, and then it just happened after that. It's governed by natural laws, just like everything else God would have done. If God created the universe with gravity, then God doesn't need to adjust or fix anything. He created the universe. Gravity is a natural law in the universe. Gravity is what determines how planets spin around, and you know what I mean? No one thinks that God's running around moving the planets around. So we would say that the movement of the planets isn't an intelligent design in the sense that there's something behind it all the time doing stuff. We just say, if you were a believer, you would say, well, God created the universe. He created the natural laws. The natural laws govern all this. So I don't know why Christians can't look at like you and look at that and say, fine, God created abiogenesis. Then he set up the laws of the nature that evolution would follow. And then evolution would exist the same way as if a God created it, or if you didn't think a God created it, it would exist on the way the natural laws created it.
Right.
So there shouldn't be this big debate going on about intelligent design or like I don't understand where I don't understand where this all comes from.
Right, and I would say that's actually, you summed up what I believe in pretty well. I said, in fact, you probably said it better than I would say it, because actually I do want to ask you guys both something real quick. Do you guys, because both of you guys have mentioned debating theists. Is this something that you guys do frequently?
Not as much as I used to, but I used to talk to Christians quite often on this subject.
Sid, what about you?
Yeah, I belong to a couple different Facebook groups, and that still seems to be a real strong sticking. It's not so much, I notice it's not so much with Hindus or Jews, but it's really a big sticking point with Christians and Muslims. And it's almost that wouldn't. And I think from my personal experience with it, I think their big hang up is because they think that human beings were a special creation. I think it's super irritating that they think, other people think that, or this theory says that actually human beings are part of the natural world and part of the animal kingdom, and that we're related to these apes, and then we're related to smaller primates, and then we're related to frogs, and we're related to fishes. I think some, not obviously like yourself, not everybody, but some of the monotheists, at least the ones I've come across, are mostly Muslim and Christians. For some reason, I think it's that. I think it's the fact that human beings are related to this process, and they want to think that we were a special, different creation. It was because even in the Bible, in Genesis, it still splits those apart. God creates the animals and the plants and the birds, but a human being creation was a different. In Genesis, was a different thing. It was a separate, special thing, and I think that's where the hang up comes up on this. I think
interesting.
Yeah, mostly. In fact, by definition we're animals. We're multicellular eukaryotes. We have our healthy egg collagen. We have nootropic. So that means we don't produce our own food. We respirate aerobically. We breathe air, and we have independent movement. That's the definition of an animal.
But I don't know, Isaiah. Maybe you've come across the same thing as well. But it seems to me that's the real kicker, is the fact that the Muslims and Christians think humans were a special, separate creation, and then
Well,
biology comes along
I'm
and says actually we're all part of the same process, and I think that's where the big hang up is.
I'm pretty sure. I mean, I'm pretty sure you mentioned a Hindu. I mean, I'm pretty sure they would believe a similar thing, but as far as humans being, unique. But the thing is that with their salvation or whatever, it's more like, it is probably something more like evolution. It's not just you're this and then that very easily. There's cycles and there's
Yeah,
rebirth, and
There's
so
many,
I
many
think,
steps.
yeah, I would think that would evolution would probably make a lot more sense to them, as far in terms of what they believe in, as far as, they might need an infinite amount of lifetimes to get where they're trying to go to. Actually, I think I told you, Sid, I just interviewed a Sikh,
yes,
and
I got to see that interview
yeah,
yet.
yeah,
I
was watching
apologize, I
that.
haven't looked at it yet.
I watched that. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, the one thing I really enjoyed with talking about him was that his lack of dogmatism in in the discussion. Because even I thought I was, I don't like to try to crush people in these conversations, but I was leaning on him a little bit in one area, and he kind of like, he kind of just pivoted and is like, man, we don't have this thing even relatively close to figured out, and I think Sikhism, they can pretty much, they're just one of the most peaceful religions in the world, and so they're not. I mean, I asked him flat out if he was interested in going out and being like an evangelical Sikh, and he's like no, that's not part of his ethos of what he's even trying to accomplish. So I think when the Christians come along and say, "Oh, we got everything figured out 100%, and everyone else is 100% wrong, and God did it exactly this way, and we know exactly how God did it," yeah, I think that's where that might come from, Sid. Honestly, because as a Christian, as a Christian, and being humble and saying, I don't have any damn clue how God actually pulled this off. Because if you ask me, well, how did God create things? Did He create it out of nothing? Did He do this? Did He do that? I don't know. Like, the Bible doesn't even come close to trying to explain how He actually did it. So it's a lot of guesswork on my part, and I think I'm not even relatively close to being able to answer that in an intelligible way. So, because it's going to be guesswork, because I just generally don't know. It's a and honestly, I think a lot of it, I don't think we'll ever get to know, at least where we're stuck on this, in human bodies in this form, because some of it is, well, even with the scientific process, some of this is stuff that we cannot directly observe. So we have to do induction and deduction and try to figure out, what exactly happened. I'm personally more of a history guy. That's more of my area of expertise. And similarly, when trying to, learn about history, you can't always solve everything perfectly. You have good ideas, some general ideas, but you can't always know 100% what it is that you're trying to know. Anyway, I have to take myself off screen for a second, and I will be back in about 5 minutes. So please just keep going. You guys can get to the next question. Just 1 minute.
Well, then, okay.
Oops. Hold on. I had somebody remove
Bring him
Sid.
back.
I know that was a total accident. Hold on.
Well, there I am.
We probably should have gotten into this at the beginning of this, but the definition of evolution is change inheritable traits within the population from one generation to the next. So basically,
Yeah.
you have reproduction. And it has to be within a group. It can't be within individuals.
Yeah, and that's another thing I find when I get into this debate. People will point to something like that and say, well, how would a trait help this person? Like, how come this person can't change something, or this animal can't change? It's like, it's not based on the individual creature. Like, that's
Yeah, it's
it's
the group.
over time, right? It's over generations. It's not on. Evolution isn't about one thing, and that's the other thing I find is people will say, where's the transition fossil? Where's the transition bones? And it's like technically every living organism's in transition.
Yep.
From their previous generation, there's always some tiny little change that's happened.
It's a population genetics thing, but basically
Right.
we can boil it down to DNA is made up of genes that code for different things. Different versions of genes exist. These are alleles, and different alleles are better suited for different environments. Or you can break it down in 3 pillars. There's gene duplication, gene mutation, and gene selection. And that's basically your evolution at work right there.
And then the other thing I run into, people say, well, you can't see evolution in real time.
Oh, yes, you can.
But you kind of can. Like, for instance, one of the things I was learning about these mRNA vaccines. Some of these vaccine companies have, they took the coronavirus genome, and it's RNA, whatever. They're the genes inside the coronavirus, and map them all out. And then they use predictive AI software based on modeling to kind of look down the road at how that virus might mutate and what possible strains could come out. And then they could shortcut vaccine development because they can kind of predict ahead of time a little bit based on the theory of evolution. They can look ahead of it a little bit and say, okay, it might go down to these 4 different strains, and if we get a development of a vaccine ahead of time, then we can kind of cut them off at the pass, right?
Yep, that's one way it's put into practical use.
Yeah. So
we can also use a similar method in developing pesticides as well.
Yes. Yeah, you can look at it. You could do this. Yeah, exactly. You could look at the insect DNA, and then see how some animal, like say a cockroach becomes. You could look ahead and say, well, this cockroach might become. They could change their genes and develop a resistance to pesticides, so we can look ahead and kind of cut them off at the pass. But insects are slower. Viruses and bacteria move quicker.
But one of my favorite examples was with the Italian wall lizard. We ended up getting a colony of these lizards, and they got transported to a different, I think it was an island, and where they had a completely different source of food. They ended up developing a mutation, and that allowed them to digest the new food source, more abundant food source, plant matter. And there was a few other changes to their personalities as well, becoming more social and all that. But that was a trait that they did not have before. So that shows that. Another interesting thing was with dogs. We were pretty confident that dogs, from wolves to dogs, right?
Right.
Well, if you ever see the dogs with the little puppy dog eyes, the cute little puppy dog eyes,
Yeah.
the muscles that allow them to do that do not exist in wolves, at least not to that degree. A wolf can't give you the puppy dog eyes.
And if anybody's going to know about wolves, it's going to be you. So I do want to get to the next one, but and this is okay. This is going to be interesting, Sid, because I really want to hear your response to this, because I will tell you this: whenever I hear atheists saying that the only thing that they lack of belief, or the only thing that they believe in, is that there's no God, and that there's nothing else follows as a result of that, I call BS on that, because if you don't believe in God, like, things either came about naturally or supernaturally. So if you take out the supernatural aspect of God and say everything is just happening naturalistically, then you have to believe in evolution. There's no other way to get around that. So that's fine. That's not a problem. But just to say that this is the only thing that you're denying, I think is a totally deceptive. But that's the question I want to have to you. Like, how do you not believe that you're not bound to evolution as an atheist, Sid?
Well,
hold on. That's it. I'm asking Sid.
Yeah, but my atheism and my belief in the theory of evolution have nothing to do with each other in this way. My atheism isn't I'm making a claim. My atheism is a rejection of a claim. So I'm not making a claim that gods don't exist. My position is that anyone that's ever claimed a god or gods or anything supernatural has never been able to prove to me that they exist. So that'd be like saying, well, if somebody can't prove something to you, then you have to, that changes some. Like, I don't see where evolution, because like you say, you're an evolutionist and you believe in God. So I don't see what the theory of evolution has to do with our belief positions on whether gods exist or not.
Well, because I'll tell you why. Because as a Christian, we don't know the exactly. Okay, so we're told that God created animals and everything, but we're not told how He did it. Okay,
Right.
so I could be open to interpret that either way. Now, you're not open to interpret that as an atheist. It's either it was intentional or it was unintentional. And so
Fair
if it
enough.
was unintentional, you're bound to this position.
No, but
Even if it gets to some outlandishly improbable lengths that you have to believe in, like there's no way to get around this. If you want to deny that God exists, you're going to have to buy this in some form or another. So to say that you're going to totally separate them, I don't think that's a very honest way to reason, honestly. But kick it over to Mate.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I agree with a lot of what Sid said. I would also add that you don't have to eliminate the supernatural to be an atheist.
You don't.
No. I mean, you can still believe in all sorts of supernatural things. It's just a matter of not having a belief in the existence of a god that would make you an atheist. All the other supernatural stuff could still be believed in.
I mean, Sid, you told me that, right?
Well, no, I was going to say that you have to change the label. Then you have to be an supernaturalist.
Yeah.
If you wanted to reject everything supernatural, but no, to go back to you, to your comment, Isaiah. Evolution is a natural process.
Right.
If all we're talking about is how it got going. So once you're into evolution, once you're past how this got going. So we've got the universe gets created, and then at some point on Earth there was no life, and this is another. I want to just tie this in quickly because.
Oh, by the way, you just admitted that the universe was created. Boom, I win. No, I'm just kidding. I'm
the
joking.
Universe started, whatever. No, but what I'm saying is that this argument turns into this whole debate about abiogenesis, which people throw at me. Abiogenesis occurred, whether you believe in a god or not, because at one point on Earth, all there was non-life.
Okay.
All there was inanimate matter.
Okay.
And then at some other point, there is self-replicating matter, which we call life.
The
self.
Hold on. Don't interrupt. Don't interrupt, Mage. Let him finish.
So the non-self, the original non-living matter, and the now living matter that occurred after it, both contain the same elements. There's nothing special in life. There's not a different new element. Like there's carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and phosphorus. That all occurs in life. And the stuff that was before was all that stuff there's nothing different between those two. There was some event that happened. So you could be a theist and say, okay, well, God, using abiogenesis, created life out of non-life. And you could be a person that says, well, I reject the claim of God did, but at some point there was non-life.
Right.
Something happened, then there was life. So once life starts, that to me, and I think maybe you wouldn't agree, but I think you and I are in the same position. That process of life evolving from that abiogenesis point forward is a natural process.
That's interesting.
The point of time before abiogenesis, my answer to this, like, how do we go from non-life to life? My answer is we don't know yet. There's some theories. There's some guys have ideas. As a natural process, I don't have an answer to that. I can't say what the natural process would be to go from non-life to life. You have an explanation that says, well, I believe that a god caused abiogenesis because a god did something to non-living matter to make it living. So I'm not stuck, quote unquote, with because I don't believe a God exists that I'm stuck with this theory of evolution. The theory of evolution for both of us is the exact same theory with the exact same processes that occurs naturalistically. If you want to step backwards and say what started abiogenesis, then my answer to you as a person that rejects the claim that gods exist, my answer to you is I don't know. I have some guesses, but I don't know.
We've been able to show that self-replicating molecules can form spontaneously and emerge spontaneously. And once you have self-replicating molecules, it's basically a snowball effect, like from there, because they can start building on each other from one generation to the next. Evolution. Though at single-cell organisms, it's more common to see horizontal gene transfer than vertical gene transfer, and that's kind of where you get more evolution taking over with multicellular life than you do with single-cell life. So we actually do see the beginning processes of how this could have emerged, and we have been able to basically replicate all relevant biomolecules and polymers to show that those can actually form on their own too.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this then, Sid. Let's just say, in this totally hypothetical situation, if evolution was proven to be false, would you believe in God?
No, not necessarily. I mean, it depends on. Well, I think we talked a little bit about this at the beginning. It depends what disproving evolution looks like, and then what theory then goes to replace it.
Right.
I just don't see a theory replacing evolution saying that somebody comes out with a theory of creationism or intelligence, whatever you want to call it, that explains everything that evolution explains, plus whatever that has come out recently that kind of disproves evolution or blows that or makes a hole in that theory. And that's my constant thing on with these Facebook discussions is people want to try to pick at the edges of evolutionary theory and then somehow think that makes the whole theory fall apart. Even if it did you picked a big enough hole in the theory that you destabilize the theory, you still have to replace that theory with something that still explains everything evolution explained, plus whatever you picked apart at. And all back is, well, God did it. Well, that's not a. That's to me. That's not a very. That's a. That's a kind of a.
No, I agree. No, I completely agree with you, and I think Christians run into. They run into their own problems when they try to go and debate this with atheists, because I do think it is a bit of a lose-lose situation for a Christian to engage in this, because one, and this was the last question, is like, do people truly understand evolution? I don't think your average layperson understands it very well as it is, because there's a lot of moving parts to it, and you might understand one side a lot better, but it's a wide field that covers a lot of topics. I mean, you guys have discussed some of them, but there's definitely more. You mentioned a little bit about bacteria, but there's a lot of moving parts, and to try to have a good understanding, I mean, you just need to be studying this thing all day long for hours and hours and hours on end. And so for me, I could do that, but what exactly is do I think I'm going to accomplish this? Like, if I defeat somebody in this debate, it doesn't mean that they're going to become a Christian. It doesn't mean that they're going to accept God exists. And if I lose the debate, then it helps solidify their position that I've won this debate, and you can get, like, it can boost your confidence. You're in this position. So I'm sorry, guys. I just do not spend time in those groups debating people about topics. I don't find it to be very productive. I have other things in my life that I'm trying to do than just sit around debating on Facebook all day. So I don't try to do that. And but I will ask you that question, Mage. Would you believe in God if atheism? I mean, if evolution. Would you believe in God if atheism was proven to be false?
By definition.
No. I know. I misspoke, but I thought that was a funny joke. But would you believe in God if?
Well, it would depend
evolution.
and it would depend on how it was disproven. I mean, if you had a guy actually show up and say, "Hey, look, you got this all wrong. This is how I'm doing it." Poof.
That's not
See?
how I did it.
Did it. See, go check out this thing I just made. Compare it to what you just everything else. It lines perfectly right up. That would disprove it. Wouldn't get me to believe in God. but no, if it was just all of a sudden the theory of evolution and just fell apart or by tomorrow, and we'd just be left with a question mark.
Right.
When
And I think
it's not a dichotomy of creation or evolution. That's not a thing. There's a whole lot of work ahead of creation.
By the way, Sid, I really like that analogy. You said picking at the edges. That's referring to like picking at the weakest parts.
Well, it's not even the weakest parts. They find something like like I have a lot of things I've seen on YouTube for videos is they'll have a group of guys sitting around, mathematicians and stuff, and they'll talk about a single cell organism and all the complexity inside the single cell organism.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say, okay, if you break the math down, you would need this number of years, and first of all, we only have a sample set of one. We've only had an evolution that we know of occur once. Or not evolution,
right.
but abiogenesis to go from non-living to living and make a living cell. So it's only occurred one time. So first of all, I'm not big on math, but the other thing I find funny, always at the end of these videos, they say, well, that shows that evolution is highly improbable, or some of them claim it's impossible. Okay, well that's fine, but you have said nothing about what you think actually happened. How do you They have no explanation for how it's other than they say, well, if evolution didn't occur, then a god did it. Well, I guess you can think that. I don't know. That's why I call picking at the edges. They'll find a little thing that they think is a weak spot, or that the theory doesn't quite match up with what they want it to, and then they just say, well, the whole thing. And then the other thing you were saying, when you said people sometimes don't understand this, that works both ways as well. But a lot of these debates, you hear somebody will write in Facebook, well, if human beings came from monkeys, why do we still have monkeys? You don't even know what you're arguing against.
But that's
human beings. No one's ever claimed human beings came from monkeys. Human beings share a common ancestry with monkeys. We didn't come from monkeys.
Well, that's not quite how I say it. I say, no, hold on. No, I say atheists say that they came from monkeys, and I actually totally agree with them.
I say we are monkeys.
Well,
no mercy left.
Yeah, monkeys is a loose term, but you know what I mean. They'll say
I was joking. That was a joke. That was a joke on my part.
It's like,
I've seen that.
Grade 8 family, grade 8 shared a common ancestry with monkeys. If you want to get specific, if you want to get into the specific whatever, but it's just and then like you said with the dogs, we the dogs, and there's some debate about how this happened, whether we domesticated them or they self-domesticated, about how wolves turned into dogs. But once we got a hold of the dogs and the breeding habits, to me, that's intelligent design. Like, we bred some dogs to do specific jobs. Like, we got dogs that can run down rat tunnels. We got dogs that can herd sheep. We got dogs. That was, to me, I mean, it's not perfect. It's not a perfect creator creating these new dog breeds, because human beings aren't perfect. But there is some intelligence in how the dogs were bred.
Yeah,
we bred the dogs to do certain things, and we look for certain traits, and we need a big tall dog to do X. We need a dog with a good temperament to do Y. You know what I mean? We looked at certain features and certain traits, and we did a intelligent design job to come up with these different breeds of dogs. But even then we screwed up, because now they're all inbred, and now they got all these genetic problems. So
right.
So much for perfect intelligent design. We're not even good at it.
We co-opt the mechanisms of evolution instead of using going through natural selection. We use an artificial selection to kind of replace the natural selection process.
Yeah.
So basically,
the same mechanism.
So basically, puppy eyes dogs just prove that gods exist. Is what you're trying to say?
No.
I'm just kidding.
No. I say it proves evolution.
Although I think it does. I think it does show that dogs think we are gods.
That's true, yeah.
And then cats with their bad attitude, the cat has obviously determined that they are the gods.
Yes.
And then we're the servants.
But that there is a natural kind of order with this, that like the cats eat the rats the dogs eat the cats, and the Koreans eat the dogs. So it's like a natural order God has created. We eat dogs here in Korea. I'm not sure if you guys got that.
I understood. I got you.
Okay.
You're not the only place they eat dog.
Right. Then they do it in China too. All right. So about top of the hour. So I wonder if you have any last thoughts, Mr. Wolf. Any last thoughts you can share with us?
This subject is so rich, we barely scratched the surface. I would rate just for anyone out there, I would recommend going to Arn his channel and looking at his systematic classification of life, and just kind of give you just a little tidbit of just how much more there is. I've got a college, I think it's a college or university level textbook, like on just the basics of plant evolution. The thing's over 900 pages long.
Wow.
I mean, and that's the basics. So it is
and
a very rich field.
You do gardening too, so I'm sure that you have to know a bit about that, right?
Actually, you don't really need to know, but I do like to know these kind of things. I've been trying to learn more about botany, that's plant biology, to work into my channel. Can
you tell us a little bit about your channel and where we could find you?
Yeah, it's called Gardens Happen. I do. Well, like I said, I try and work in a little bit of science every once in a while, but mostly you just give me like garden tips and tricks, and just kind of I show off my garden, the warts and all. I actually have a live stream I planned to do tomorrow with a special guest that's coming up, my first special guest. So I'm quite excited about that with Bree from Hive Simons.
Nice.
All right. Sid, you got any last thoughts?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, Isaiah, on this. I find this topic, when it comes up with discussion, this whole topic of evolution, I find is kind of a dead end. And I think, honestly, the reason it's a bit of a dead end is because it kind of hangs on this premise that, like I was mentioning to you, that some religions and some religious people in some traditions are kind of stuck on this special creation thing for humans. And I think that's because if it wasn't for that, it'd be just like you and I talking about this, and we would totally agree about 99% of this. So to me, this topic's not that interesting. I'm far more interested in when we talk about morality, the moral of religion. That's way more interesting to me than trying to hammer through the evolution. Because, like I said, I don't have a gardening channel. I don't have a evolution channel. So yeah, other than when I have to deal with it at work a little tiny bit, I just don't really think about this stuff too much.
Well, you know what? I will say something that one of the things I got disabused of most of in the last 2 years of doing this podcast and talking to atheists is that I truly believed that if you were an atheist, that like there's no real way to put true objective value and meaning of life. And there was a guy by the name of Darrington, who's co-host, atheist co-host, and he told me that because he believes that life came about in such an impossibly unlikely way of happening, that puts value on it so much more to him. Whereas, like, if a God just created it, from his perspective, that very simply put, that to him, he just said that it seemed like there was more of a struggle and more of a overcoming the odds for humans and animals in general, I think, to exist. But that being said, I do want to close off with this thought that however you count for life, like, is not so important as how we're treating that life right now. And we can sometimes get in these kind of debates where we're just trying to win, we're trying to one up the other person. And I mentioned my book about racism, and the chapter I'm working on right now is a matter of, just borrowing something really quickly from Buddhism. There's this class of people who they're called the Bodhisattva, something like that. Hard to pronounce, but anyway, there's these people who they have the ability to get to heaven or nirvana but they put it off because they know that if they get to this level of enlightenment, they won't be able to help people on the earth anymore. And they delay their own heaven so they could help pull people out of a hell that they're living in. And I got so convicted to learn about those people because oftentimes I want to feel this level of like moral or intellectual superiority over people. And these people, it doesn't even play into their mind. Like they recognize they are at a higher level and they just want to help other people. So I think however you account for life, it's so important that we try to help each other out on this planet. And I think atheists who are secular humanists, I have a lot of common with them. So we can work together. But yeah, I want to thank you guys so much. Sid, how's your house treating you these days, by the way?
Oh, it's all right. I had my face is all kind of puffing out because I'm back on some prednisone. So I've had a little my immune system's ramped up for some strange reason, so they're trying to get it knocked back down. So yeah, I'm still on the right side of the grass. So
God hasn't killed you yet. That's right side of the grass. Yeah, I think God is trying to kill you there for.
He keeps messing with the lightning bolts, but yeah.
Anyway, Mage.
His aim game.
Mage, I really want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your input. You had some really great insights. And good luck on that new stream that you got coming out, bro. I always appreciate talking to you.
This is always a topic I enjoy talking about.
Yeah, and Sid, thanks again. Here's our website at the bottom. And don't forget to like and subscribe, all that good stuff. We're sitting here having conversations and trying to see the best of humanity. So we can agree to disagree on some topics and agree to say, I don't know, because I don't know a lot of this stuff here. Some of the stuff you guys said is kind of flying past my head. So we can't agree to disagree or agree to say, I just simply do not know. So thank you guys so much. And we look forward to seeing you back again at REC Podcast. And you guys have a wonderful weekend. Goodbye. So.